Hey students, welcome to your lecture on European interactions with Native Americans. This lecture is your homework for Wednesday, January 8th. While you finish this lecture, you need to be filling out the note sheet that you got in class today. So first I want to start with the image right here. This image depicts the various groups, various indigenous groups by culture. So you can see that there's like Southwest Indian, Native or indigenous groups, um, you have the Plains Indigenous group, Subarctic, Amazonian, Andean, which means they probably live in the Andes. You have the Southern groups. So there were many indigenous groups that lived on North and South America prior to European arrival. So I wanted to review push and pull factors. A push factor is a reason that people would want to leave or move away from their current location. So remember, these can be things such as jobs, religious persecution, like with Joseph, they had to escape because they were Jewish. So different reasons someone would want to leave where they currently live. A pull factor is a reason that someone would want to move somewhere new. Are they getting freedom? Are they having more opportunities? Those would be pull factors. So we'll come back to these when we talk about both North and South America. So there are some pull factors of North America. This is a map of North America before 1754. So you can see this is New Spain. You have Russia up here. You have the English in red, and then the French in here. And those four groups of people moved to North America because of freedom, economic opportunity, religious freedom, and abundant land. So all of this land was available. Indigenous groups were living on this land, but these European countries came in and decided to colonize and conquer this land and make it theirs. So who already occupied North America? This is a map of all of the indigenous Native American groups in North America. So you can see the Southern Paiute, this is going to be Nevada, the Mojave Desert, the Hopi. Over here on the East Coast, you have the Powhatan, so think like Pocahontas. You have the Iroquois. So all of this land that was conquered by Europeans was already being lived on by indigenous Native American groups. And you can see here you have the Aztec and the Maya into Central America and the Inca in South America, but we'll get to those more later. So here are the indigenous tribes of Mexico. You have the Olmec here in orange, the Aztec and the Maya, and then there was a bunch of little indigenous groups living in the brown areas. So France. So we're going to start with France and look into why they moved to America. So France sent people to move to America because they heard Spain was making money. Spain was bragging about all this gold they were bringing back, and France wanted to make some money and to become wealthy. The people who came from France were fur traders and Catholic and Jesuit missionaries. Two explorers from France are Samuel de Champlain and Jacques Marquette. So Jacques has a school named after him. It's close to the Canadian border, and there's Lake Champlain named after Samuel de Champlain. Some important areas that were claimed by France were the St. Lawrence River, west of the Appalachian Mountains, so the Great Lakes region down to New Orleans. They also claimed Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So that's the island in the Caribbean that is split in half. Haiti is on one side and the Dominican Republic's on the other. Some indigenous groups that lived on the land that France conquered were the Algonquin, the Huron, the Delaware, and the Shawnee. And tomorrow in class, you're going to read about how all of those indigenous groups interacted with the French. Next is the British. They came to America mostly because they were escaping religious persecution. They also wanted to make money and gain new land. So the people who came for the British were men, merchants, and sailors. Initially, very few women came. They will eventually start joining the British colonizers, but initially it was just men, merchants, and sailors. And some notable British explorers are Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Henry Hudson. He's also a Dutch explorer, but he did claim some areas that the British eventually control. So important areas claimed are the East Coast, Jamestown. Jamestown, as you know, is one of America's first colonies, or North America's first colonies. The indigenous groups that lived on the land were the Cherokee, Iroquois, Powhatan, and Wampanoag. And you will read tonight or tomorrow in class about the interactions with those four groups. So now we're going to look at South America. The pull factors of South America were the prospect of gold and silver, to expand the empire, for personal gain. Many people got land grants or land in South America, and their goal was to convert Native Americans to Catholicism. So you can see in our map, you have the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the English are up here too, but very, very tiny. So here's a map of the indigenous tribes in Central and South America. You're most familiar with the Inca right here who lived in the Andes, but there were plenty of Amazonian tribes and groups all through Central America who lived on the islands in the Caribbean. So Christopher Columbus interacted with the Taino. So plenty of indigenous tribes already occupying this land. So Spain. As you know from your work earlier this week, Spain conquered most of the land in the Americas. So why did they move? Spanish moved for the prospect of increasing wealth if they found gold and silver. So you read in your packet about all of the gold that they took from the Inca, over 26,000 pounds of silver. So there was that I can get rich. Missionaries and conquistadors wanted to conquer the land and expand their empire. If you were a conquistador, they sent, and they sent you and you got land, they gave you land that you could own. So conquistadors and missionaries were people who came to conquer the land. The important areas claimed are Florida, from Texas to California, Mexico, parts of Central America, and a majority of the west coast of South America. There were a lot of Spanish explorers. The first one we're going to talk about was Hernan Cortez. He discovered Cuba and South America. Next, we have Juan Ponce de Leon. He discovered Florida and set up St. Augustine, which was the first settlement in North America. Ferdinand Magellan is another one. He was Portuguese but sailed for the Spanish. You don't need to write all of these down. You should have a couple. Christopher Columbus, as you know, he was Italian, but he sailed for Spain and discovered the West Indies. And then Francisco Pizarro discovered Mexico and Central America. Some indigenous groups that lived on the land that the Spanish conquered were the Pueblo, Apache, Navajo, Tiwa, Aztec, Inca, and Taino. There were many, many more. These are just the bigger indigenous tribes that you might have heard of before. Next, the Dutch came to the Americas for the fur trade. They were very interested in North America for the fur, just like the French. And in the Caribbean, they enslaved humans for salt and sugarcane. The people sent by the Dutch were the Dutch East India Company, so it was a business, and their main explorer was Henry Hudson. The Dutch claimed many important areas in the Americas, Guyana, Suriname, parts of Brazil, and then they had the Dutch West Indies, which is 5 islands in the Caribbean, the Hudson River and part of Long Island in New York, and then also parts of Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. Now, all of these that I'm mentioning in North America did eventually get sold or transferred over to the British, but initially the Dutch were there. Some big indigenous groups that you might have heard of before are the Arawak and the Carib indigenous groups that occupied many of the Caribbean islands before the Dutch arrived. And last but not least, we have Portugal. Portugal was interested in the exportation of goods. People were given land grants in South America if they moved there. And then they started exploring for gold in the late 1600s. The people who came were merchants and the Jesuit or Catholic missionaries to convert Native Americans. Some Portuguese explorers you need to know are Pedro Alvarez Cabral, and he discovered Brazil in the 1500s, and Amerigo Vespucci, who America is named after, on the coast, and he explored the coast of Brazil. He was Italian but sailed for Portugal. Portugal claimed Brazil, parts of Uruguay, and parts of Venezuela. Eventually, those will be given to Spain through land acquisitions. And the big indigenous groups that lived on the land are the Tupi and the Tapuia. And the Tupi were the primary group, and the Tapuia means not Tupi. So to make sure that people knew that they were not connected. All right, tomorrow in class, you're going to complete a reading on how indigenous groups were impacted. But for extra credit, who do you think is in the picture to the right? Bring your answer to class tomorrow. See you in class. Bye, y'all.